So today's video is going to focus on chapter 1, and chapter 1 is very vocabulary heavy chapter. So in addition to the practice that we will do in class and with various resources, you will also want to practice with this vocabulary on your own. If you're a flashcard maker, this is a great chapter to be making flashcards for, again, because it is very vocabulary heavy. So let's start with our basics here. Okay, so anatomy versus physiology. What are those two things? Because we're going to be looking at both of these things this year, and we're going to be looking at them at the same time. So we're going to start first with anatomy. So anatomy is our study of structure and location. So it's basically where stuff is. Okay, if you look at this diagram over here, okay, this is an example of anatomy, right? Here's where my heart is located. Here's what my lungs are. This is where my brain is, right? It's my study of where things are, okay? And that's it. And we can break anatomy down into two basic parts. We can break it down into what we call gross anatomy versus microscopic anatomy. So gross anatomy is things that we can see with the naked eye. So for instance, when I am, looking at a body, when I'm looking at a specimen, okay, these are my gross anatomy structures. We can look at surface anatomy, which is literally what it sounds like, the anatomy of the actual surface. So really focusing obviously on the skin, okay, as well as bumps, markings, things like that. Anything that would really say, okay, this is the surface, okay, and this is significant on the surface. Regional anatomy is done, again, like it says, based off of the region. So the area of the body that we're focused on. So this is more important if you're becoming a doctor, you're becoming a nurse, and you're going to specialize. Maybe you're going to be a podiatrist and you're going to focus on the foot. So you're going to know every single possible little tiny muscle, tendon, nerve, everything that is within that foot, right? Because that is the region that you are focused on. Systemic anatomy is what we do in our class, okay, where we basically look at the systems. And this is what most people think of when they think anatomy and physiology, right? We look at our systems that are there for us, our systems like our cardiovascular system, our nervous system, our muscular system, okay? And we look at those systems bit by bit, and we pick them apart. Okay? Developmental anatomy is going to be what you see as people develop. So as we mature, as we grow, as we change, okay, as we go from embryo to fetus, to newborn, to toddler, adolescent, teenager, adult. Okay, that's our developmental anatomy. So again, as things change over time. So we're looking at that development here. Microscopic anatomy from our gross anatomy in the sense that these are things that I'm going to need a microscope to be able to see. And our second chapter is heavily focused on microscopic anatomy, on looking at tissues in particular. So again, gross anatomy are the things we can see with our naked eye, where microscopic anatomy are the things that are going to require a microscope. We're going to need an aid. Okay, so the first one we have there is cytology. Cytology is the anatomy of cells. If you think back to freshman biology, things like Golgi apparatus, mitochondria, nucleus, cytoplasm, the cell membrane. So it's our anatomy of the actual cells. Where histology is going to be our anatomy of the tissues. And this is where our big focus is on chapter 2. What do the different muscle tissues look like? The different connective tissues, epithelial tissue, nervous tissue. Okay, and we'll be using microscopes, whether that's microscopes virtually or cross your fingers microscopes in the classroom, to really be able to look at these tissues, be able to identify them, know where they are, recognize them. Okay, so our next thing here is physiology, right? So anatomy, we were focused on our structure, our location. Physiology is going to be, how do these things now work? Okay, now I know where they are. So now tell me what they do, right? So what does my cardiovascular system do? What are my lungs doing? Okay, and so for our various types of physiology, we have cell physiology, right? Cell physiology is exactly what it sounds like. right? What is the cell doing and what is the cell's function? So how does a muscle cell work versus a nerve cell? Right? Systemic is based off of the systems. Again, this is where our focus will be in class. Our class is organized where we look at each system and we look at both the anatomy and the physiology within that particular system. So while I might look at my urinary system or my excretory system and figure out where the kidneys, the bladder, the ureters are, then I would do the physiology of it now and how do we actually form the urine? How do we remove it from our body? In our pathological physiology, this is going to be our disease. This is going to be when something is going wrong, because that is what disease is. That something is going wrong with our physiology. Okay, so the expectation is going to be that you're going to know all these different types of anatomy. You're going to know things like regional anatomy is an example of gross anatomy. Systemic anatomy is an example of gross anatomy. Gross anatomy is anatomy I can see with my naked eye. I don't need a tool to help me. I don't need a microscope. Okay. Developmental anatomy is the anatomy of how we mature and change. Okay. So that's the level, the expectation that you would be expected here. Hopefully you notice that I can't necessarily write every single thing on the screen. So you were hopefully adding, pausing, rewinding as you needed. Okay, remember that is totally up to you, and you have that flexibility with the video type notes. So pause, rewind, get everything that you need down. Feel free to draw pictures if that will help. Okay? Again, these are your notes that are meant to help you and to basically become your book. They're meant to help you study. Okay, so let's look at some various body positions now that we've got the difference between anatomy and physiology sorted out. Okay, so our most common body position that we're going to use and we're going to talk about and refer to is our anatomical position. This is the position that we always put the patient in. Okay, this is when I say right and I say left, there's no confusion as to whether I'm referring to the patient's right or the patient's left or my right as I look at the patient. Okay, we always have to mentally put ourselves into this position. Okay, and so when we are using anatomical position, we will use right and left. And when we use right and left, we are always going to be referring to the patient. Okay, so never, as I face, if I was the doctor facing this woman right here, this over here would be my right, and this over here would be my left. And so I could end up marking something incorrectly in a chart. I could end up, you know, looking for an issue that is on the wrong side. Okay. And so again, it's really critical that we're always using the patient's right and left. So when the patient is oriented in anatomical position, you'll notice they are standing up, right? So they are what we would call erect. So they are standing upright. If you look down at their feet, their toes are pointed forward, and so are their nothing is rotated out. Feet, sorry, my pen froze for a second. So toes are forward, knees are forward. Okay, what else is forward? You notice the palms there are forward. So the palms are forward, which makes their thumbs face to the outside. Okay, and that's how they will stand. Their nose is also forward. Okay, so the nose, palms, knees, toes, all of these face forward. You'll notice she doesn't have her head rotated to the side. Okay, and that is anatomical position, standing straight up. So when we move on to directional terms and we talk about things being anterior, being towards the front or towards the back or towards the head or towards the feet, okay, we're talking about that as if the patient is standing in this anatomical position. So again, standing upright, so erect, a nose, palms, knees, toes, everything is facing forward. Okay, some alternative body positions that you may need to put a patient in or that you may see described. okay, are prone versus supine. Okay, so when somebody is prone, as you'll see in this picture right here, they are face down. And when somebody is supine, they are face up, right? So if somebody is supine, they can drink the soup, right? She can take in the soup, okay? She is supine. This patient here that is face down and prone, okay, they would be drowning in their soup, right? They'd be face down in their soup. Okay, so those are the two that you will see other than anatomical position. But again, all of our directional terms and things are going to be focused on anatomy. Okay, so I know again, like I told you, this is going to be very vocabulary heavy. Get your notes down and we'll work with these terms as much as we can. And again, you will want to practice these terms as well. Okay, so now let's look at what we call our body planes. So our body planes are kind of how we can divide the body up. And you'll see the various sections here. This might be a great spot to stop and draw a quick diagram. Okay, stick figures, again, these are your notes. Okay, if I were taking my notes, right, here's my stick figure. Okay, straight down the middle, as best I can do on a computer pen. Okay, and I would, boom, there's my mid-sagittal drawing. Okay, so that is okay for you to draw pictures, and it's okay for them to be bad pictures. Okay, all right, so let's start with that one. Let's start with sagittal. So sagittal is going to divide the body into right and left parts. Okay, and so it will divide the body into these right and left parts. And in particular, we can be very, very specific, and we can do what we call a mid-sagittal line. You'll see that mid-sagittal line here described as this median plane. Okay, so this median plane is the same as our mid-sagittal line. This median plane is dividing us into equal right and left parts. So mid-sagittal means that it is going right down the midline, okay, and it is dividing us here into equal right and left parts. So our parasagittal line is going to divide us into unequal right and left parts. Okay, so mid-sagittal, this median plane, equal right and left. Parasagittal, unequal right and left parts. So you can see the sagittal plane here, this kind of orangish colored one, okay, where it's a little bit off to the side, so it's just kind of covering this part of his body. So it is not an equal right and left division. So our next plane is called a transverse plane. And a transverse plane is sometimes called a cross plane. And transverse planes are going to divide into top and bottom. Okay, and these don't have to go. The one you can see right here is this red one right here. And you can see it going right through the belly button. A transverse plane doesn't have to go through the belly button. It could be way up high at the top and go through just the top of his head there, or way down at near his ankles. Okay, but a transverse plane is going to divide into top and bottom portions. Okay, and our last one is a coronal plane. A coronal plane is also called a frontal plane. You can see it indicated here as the blue one there. So a coronal plane, or the frontal plane, is going to divide into front and back parts. Or, to be a little bit more vocabulary based, because again, that's the terms you're going to see in just a minute, anterior portions and posterior portions. Okay, the last thing we're going to do are these directional terms. These directional terms we're going to look at in pairs, okay, and we're going to look at in their opposing pairs, because that's, to me, usually the easiest way for us to kind of wrap our brains around these directional pairs. The first pair that we're going to look at here is cranial versus caudal. You may want to go ahead and draw some diagrams. The arrows, I think, could be really helpful here. So if we look at cranial versus caudal, cranial means what it sounds like, right, towards the head. Caudal means towards the tail. Okay, caudal is tail. My little pen is messing up here. So we're just going to have to go with this is towards the tail. Okay. So tail. You heard me say it? Get it down. I don't know what's going on in this chunk right here. Okay, so cranial is towards the head, caudal is towards the tail. A lot of times, in particular in your book and stuff, you'll see cranial interchanged with superior and caudal interchanged with inferior. Okay, superior means exactly what it means in real life, right? Towards the top, where inferior would be towards the bottom. Again, my little pen is having some giant fits. So superior to the top, inferior towards the bottom. Okay, our next pair of terms would be anterior or ventral. So these mean the same thing. Okay, the one that throws people the most is the ventral term, but your book uses it a lot and will use it a lot. So make sure you realize that anterior and ventral are the same thing. Okay, and that is just going to mean that it's towards the front. Okay, where posterior or dorsal, again, dorsal is the term that a lot of people have some trouble with. Okay, posterior or dorsal is going to mean towards the back. You'll see as it points back here towards his spine. Okay, so we've got anterior ventral towards the front, posterior dorsal to the back. Okay, if we head over here to this anterior view, you'll notice this guy is standing in anatomical position. We have medial and lateral. Medial means towards the midline. Okay, so you can kind of think of it, if you want, as towards the belly button. So towards the midline, where lateral means out towards the edge. Okay, so if something is median, it's closer towards the midline. The midline would be going, oh, that's not the midline. I think my thing needs to be recalibrated. So I'm going to kind of guess where midline would be on this. Okay, okay, so midline would be right through his nose. That was closer. Okay, but that would be median. Okay, the next set of terms we have are proximal and distal. Proximal and distal, you'll notice, are only on the arms and the legs. So proximal and distal refer only to the limbs, okay, which is our arms and our legs. Okay, and so by proximal, we mean closer to the point of attachment. Again, you don't want me to try to write that with this pen that's doing crazy things. Okay, so proximal is going to be closer to the point of attachment. You'll see on the arm here, proximal is up by the shoulder because that's where the arm attaches to the trunk. And on the leg, proximal is up by the hip because that's where it attaches again to the trunk. Distal is going to be further from the point of attachment. Okay, but again, both in the arms and the legs, it will be the same. So further from the point of attachment. So again, these only refer to arms and legs. And our last set of terms is, they're written over here on the side because they're not in your diagrams anywhere. So we've got superficial versus deep. Okay, when we're talking about superficial and deep, we are talking about the surface of the skin, right? So if something is superficial, it is closer to the surface of the body. If something is deep, it is further from the surface of the body. So the way you're going to see these terms and interact with these terms would be descriptive-wise. Like, for example, you may see a question or a problem that says the elbow is blank to the wrist. And you may want to write some of these examples down. I think they could be beneficial to you, right? The elbow is blank to the wrist. Well, the elbow is proximal to the wrist. It's closer to the point of attachment than the wrist is. Let's say we have a question where it says the skin is blank to the muscle. Well, the skin is superficial to the muscle. Or we have the thigh. So this part of the leg right here, the thigh, is inferior to the abdomen. Right? It's further down than the abdomen. Or the chest. So the chest right here. The chest is medial to the shoulder. It's closer to the midline than the shoulder is. So that's how you're going to see these. And again, we'll practice with these. And you'll do some independent practice and we'll do some live class practice with these. Okay, but that's how they're going to be used, comparative like that. So you'll really want to make sure you've got the vocabulary down. Posterior to the back, dorsal also to the back, lateral out towards the edges. Get that vocabulary down so that you can then make those comparisons.